Good afternoon, everyone. We have another Wednesday afternoon sales session here at DMI. And today we have the extreme pleasure of bringing someone on the life side from a Nexus. Al Zuckerman is going to talk to you about the BGA product. So since that is on the life side and that is not my bailiwick, I'm going to hand it off to Amy and she's going to take it from now. So Amy, all yours.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. Certainly appreciate your time. So I've got Al. He is my business partner over to Nexus. As you all know, I'm in Phoenix. Al is literally about 10 minutes from me. So I'm going to turn this over to Al. Al actually helped create this policy. So if you guys haven't had a chance to get on a one-on-one with Al, this is the good news is we're going to do it right now. So without further ado, Mr. Alan Zuckerman.
Appreciate it, Amy, and thanks, Jim. Very happy to be here with all of you. I've had a long history with DMI, and goes back, actually back to the time I was 13 years old with Mr. Donahue and the group there. So I really appreciate and always look forward to times with DMI and the team there at DMI, and I welcome that. As Amy and Jim indicated, we're going to talk about the Balanced Growth Accumulator product today. That is the Nexus's first IUL product, and the carrier on this product is Securian, or what many of you may know as Minnesota Life. Again, a company that's been around 140 plus years, 96 Comdex, rated by all 4 rating services. You just don't find IUL carriers rated that highly. I think you will find it will be very easy when you start talking about the financial strength of the company. It really does help justify your sale in the carrier. And in today's world, of course, having those types of ratings and being a stalwart like they are is a big deal. So one of the first things, I'm not sure what the familiarity with how a Nexus operates and how we develop product. I want to cover a little bit about that up front so that you all have kind of a level playing field with regards to who is a Nexus, how do we fit into this whole picture, and then we'll kind of look at where is the marketplace a little bit. We'll look at some basic features of the contract. Again, a 30 or 40 minute session today is not going to make you a product expert. My goal today truly is that I give you enough that you then need to check in with Amy and talk with Amy directly and get the rest of the story. And if Amy deems it worthwhile, she'll connect you with me in terms of we can do a joint call, a conference call, and we can really delve into this thing in tremendous detail. And in the marketplace that we're in today, with things like 49A regulation, 7702 coming in place, the landscape is changing a little bit. You're going to see some dramatic moves from certain carriers, other carriers not so much. And one of the design goals of a Nexus is that we built it right the first time, that we don't have to go back and make these wholesale changes in our products. There are little nuances, obviously, to comply with regulation, but we've built it right with a forward-looking idea, an eye to the future, that it's consumer-friendly to begin with. And so that's a very important concept to really start this whole thing off with. And I get asked every single day, who is a Nexus? I don't get it. You're not a carrier. You're not an investment bank. You're not a market maker. Who and what are you? And you're not DMI. And the best way I describe it is really, you think about Ford Motor Company. Ford manufactures the Mustang. But when a Mustang comes off the assembly line, it is not a Lamborghini, it's not a Maserati, it's not a Ferrari. Listen, it's a $40,000 car. It looks pretty cool. It has some iconic American market kinds of thought, but it isn't those other cars. And then they take that car, that off the assembly line Mustang, and they send it off to Carroll Shelby at Shelby Motors in Las Vegas. And 90 days later, that thing is a Shelby Cobra Mustang. And it's now worth $150,000, $200,000. Well, what changed? How did that become from a $40,000 vehicle to a multiple $100,000 vehicle? And if it's like the one on the left, it goes for multiple millions at auction. Something changed to cause that to happen. And it's a lot more than just Carol Shelby signing the dashboard and 2 stripes being put down the hood. That's not the deal. Well, a Nexus is the Shelby Motors of IUL. We take and FIAs for that matter. We take off the assembly line products, a carrier's regular product, and we customize it. We change it. And really, what 2 things do we do? Well, it's no different than the Ford Mustang. Shelby improves the efficiency of the product, and it increases the horsepower. In other words, gives it more bang, more power, more ability. Create efficiency, more power. In the investment or insurance world, we're talking about power equals rate of return and greater efficiencies. And so a Nexus becomes the Shelby Motors. We increase efficiencies, we increase the power of the product, but the base chassis is still that base chassis that came off the assembly line. And that's very important. That is what we are first and foremost. We are a product innovation company. And the way we do product innovation is interesting. But we do it through a group of elite distributors. And in the Ford world, those elite distributors would be your dealerships. Well, every Ford dealer in the Ford system does not have the ability or the approval to sell Shelbys. To get an allotment of Shelbys, you have to meet criteria. Typically, it's in the service department, but there are criteria that they have to meet every year. In the Nexus world, there's criteria that an organization has to meet, a DMI has to meet every year in order to keep their limited distribution of the Nexus product. And those criteria have more to do with the back office than it does volume. It's about, can they service the product? Do they know how to do it? Do they have proficient people in the back end that help you as an advisor create more business? And so there are only 22 of you, of those DMIs. There's only 22 in the entire country. And if you're an advisor that is not appointed with one of those 22 organizations, you don't have access to sell the Nexus product. And in fact, on the annuity side, it's even less. As Jim can attest to, there's even fewer entities that can sell on the annuity side. But that, be that as it may, it's a limited distribution product. And what does that actually mean? Well, it means from a number of advisors, there's less than 1%, according to NAIFA, less than 1% of all licensed insurance advisors in North America utilize and work with on a Nexus-built IUL on a week-in, week-out basis. That puts you amongst the best 1% in the country, or better than 99%. And that's the advantage of you working with an organization like a DMI. They've taken their professionalism and their abilities pretty seriously to be able to distribute a product like this on a limited basis. Well, how do we do that development? Well, that development is done in conjunction with an organization called Genesis Financial. This product has 15 issued patents and 17 pending patents associated to it. So it is a patented product. There is no other product in the entire industry that has that many patents associated to it. We're pretty proud of that idea. That means that features and benefits and calculations and some of the behind the curtain stuff that goes on in the contract, we actually have the scientific proof that it's different, that it does do things differently, and therefore it becomes a well-researched, provable methodology that we use in the development of this product. And we do that with a team of 17 actuaries. Now, in the insurance world, when you think about development, most carriers only have 8 to 10 actuaries in the entire company. We have 17. And that gives us the capability of doing research and development, doing enhancements to current products, and building new products all simultaneously. We rarely, if ever, have to put one idea on the shelf in order to work on a different product because we don't have capacity. We have capacity. We have 17 actuaries. That is a huge competitive advantage that we have in doing that research and development enhancements and new product rollouts that we're able to do. That makes the process so much easier and more well-rounded. And then finally, it's those strategic partnerships. And how do we do that? Well, we do those strategic partnerships by actual contract. We have actual contracts with every one of these entities to provide particular services to a Nexus. Whether that be a carrier, and you see security in the lower left-hand corner, or many of you are probably familiar with Nationwide, both on the annuity and life side, a major carrier with us, AIG, Athene, Transamerica, all carriers. But then you also have investment banks, and you have capital companies like Blackstone, who is actually an equity partner now in a Nexus. So all of these things lend particular facets to each and every contract or to a Nexus as a company that make up the totality. So between those strategic partnerships, those elite distributors like DMI, and the product innovation methodology, you're the piece that ties it all together as an advisor. You need to be affiliated with one of those elite distributors. That gives us the ability to bring you those strategic partnerships, and we on the front side are developing those products and taking them to those strategic partners and adding new strategic partners all the time. That makes up the value proposition that makes up a Nexus. But I think that gives you just a little bit of background of how we go about our process, why we are uniquely different than a carrier or than any of the investment banks, and the value that that brings to you within your practice. So we start to take a look at IUL, and why is this IUL so different? You know, the marketplace as a market, almost all IULs out there are built on S&P chassis, and they're S&P based products. And we believe that it isn't the S&P all the time or always the S&P. We think there needs to be more asset classes in a person's portfolio to garner the best rates of return at any given moment in time. So when we look back and we look at the S&P 500 and we look at what it's done, you see that it's very volatile. Big peaks, big valleys. And that volatility, while capturing the volatility is important, that also has a tendency to raise a little havoc in insurance, because you got expenses that come out every month. You need consistency. And consistency is a big issue in the returns. But it's not so much just the returns of the index, it's the returns that are captured by you as or your clients on a regular basis. And do you have that capability? And so we asked our investment banks that you just looked at, those strategic partnerships. We went to them last year, actually prior to last year, the fourth quarter of 2019, and we asked them to give us their predictions and what they think on a forward-looking basis, on a forecasted model, as opposed to back testing. And here's what they said to us, that while the S&P has averaged almost 14% from 2010 to 2020, they think going forward, they're forecasting it to be around 6%. Now that's gross return of the of the market. You know that when you plug that into an IUL, you do not get the dividends of the market. And the dividends are worth approximately 2 points. So we take 2 points off of that. And the market is going to be what they predict to be somewhere from 4.5% to 6% is the market. And when you look at what does that mean in the IUL world, if the gross in the market is 4.5 to 6, and we're illustrating, or carriers are illustrating their products at 6, what does that mean when you start looking at the totality of the product and the expenses involved in the product? What does the actual gross return need to be to make sure that you get credited with that illustrated rate or better? And so you take a look at where the market is, and you look at the products out there that you all are probably using every day. You recognize every one of these carriers, and I'm sure produce products or policies from any or all of these entities. And when you start looking at the fees involved, we believe that comparing total aggregate fees is the way you really measure a product. It's not the illustration. The ledger of the illustration does not show you all of this. You've got to go to those expense reports within the illustration. And when you start looking at aggregate total expenses, that's where the story starts to separate. You look at within the BGA product, our 2-year account, which is our bellwether account, we give a 90 par with a 290 spread. But look at many of the very popular comparatives out there. You see 10% spreads, 8.5% spreads, 9% spreads. What happens if you have a 9 spread and the market's only going to, you're illustrating at 6, and we're expecting the market to be 6 on the high side? Where is your net return? That's a -3 return. 9 spread, 6 return, that's a -3. How are you ever going to accomplish that? And then you add on top of that the idea of guaranteed rates. Look at some of these contractual guaranteed spreads. While BGA is at a 3% contractual spread on the 2-year full S&P, look at some of these at 20 and 30%. Not to say that any of them will ever go to 20 or 30, but just the mere idea that they're capable of it, that's a lever the carrier can pull. And today, they're not near those, but the idea of it changing and going closer to those contractual maximums, that becomes what you're signing your client up for. And that's where some of this starts to, the pavement or it hits the rubber, hits the road there. And then you look at those total charges. We've talked about total charges. Look at the differentiation in total charges. Now, this is not just COIs. This is total aggregate charges. COIs actually amount to some of the lowest single category charges within a contract. It's many of the other charges. What's the effect of these spreads? What's the effect of the asset-based charges? What's the effect of some of these other kinds of charges that are in a contract, and how do they impact the overall rate of return? So we believe that's where this has to go, and where you start looking at some of these opportunities, and is the policy really the right deal for your client? So what's our answer? It's Balanced Growth Accumulator, of course, and we've already kind of introduced that to you. What are the main reasons why you want to use it? Well, first of all, it's a proprietary product. Limited distribution, as we talked about earlier, and Securian or Minnesota Life being the carrier and a very highly rated carrier. Those innovative uncapped crediting designs. One of the cornerstones of a Nexus is that we always have uncapped designs. Our products are always uncapped all the time. They never can be capped. And a cap is exactly an expense. It's a limitation in the contract. You know, we went back and we showed, you remember the graph there of the S&P 500, big peaks, big valleys. If you have a cap, you're not getting those big peaks, and you need the big peaks to offset the valleys. That's imperative that your client is able to capture those big peaks. An example of that would be the full calendar year last year, where at the end of the year, on a 1-year basis, the policy would have been credited with 44% return. Where do you see a cap of 44%? You don't see that. There's nothing like that in the industry. If we would have been a capped product, our clients would have never received that kind of crediting. It's very important. It performs in a variety of conditions because it's not an all S&P all the time. We have an alternate index that's very important to this product called Prism. It's actually managed by the S&P Global Corporation, but it's a low volatility index that I think you'll find to be a very, very good option. Fourthly, the ability to give partial index credits. This is the notion, if you're familiar on the annuity side of gains to date, tracking values daily, this is that version in IUL. We actually pay a second calculation for interest beyond the segment period. We pay a second calculation for interest based on expenses that come out of the contract, and we do it real time. So as the expense comes out, we also calculate interest paid to pay, and we pay it real time in the same month that it was deducted. This is the only policy that we know of, and this is patented, the calculations and the process. It's the only policy we know of that pays those credits the way we pay them. And that adds significant accumulation to the contract, or potentially adds significant accumulation to the contract, again, to give you more dollars in the consumer's pocket. And then, of course, those design flexibility and choices, the ability to allocate between allocations and to have the ability to increase or drop death benefits, to change your premiums, and all of the riders that you would typically find in any of these contracts. So very, very important when you start looking at that. Now, what are those innovative index solutions? We're going to go through that, and then I'm going to wrap up my comments. I think you may have some questions. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions if Amy and Jim want to open that up to do that. I'm more than happy to do that. So we talked about the S&P Prism Index. That's our multifaceted approach. That's our asset allocation strategy in addition to the full S&P. The goal of Prism is to smooth volatility for consistent and stable returns. It performs in a variety of market conditions, last year being one of those examples, and it offers a very dynamic multi-asset class kind of scenario. So three very important philosophies in terms of an IUL and garnering the returns that are available in the market at any given time. This particular strategy is actually reweighted and reallocated daily at the close of business every single day. You'll find other low volatility indexes in the marketplace, and most, if not all of those indices, the allocation that's in the index is a static allocation. What I mean by that is the index itself mandates certain percentages of the money into certain asset classes all the time. The example I would give is it may say 30% of the index must be in bonds. Now the bonds might change, but it must be in bonds. Well, what if bonds are not performing? What if bonds are just the dog of the market at that point in time? It doesn't matter whether they're corporate bonds, individual bonds, municipal bonds, high yield bonds. Bonds might not be performing. You don't want 30% necessarily there all the time, but you're forced into that. In this index, that's not the case. There are none of those parameters. We're able to put the dollars where they're returning at all times. We use equities, we use bonds, we use commodities, and cash. All of four of those make up the Prism Index. Again, it's designed for consistency in very volatile markets. You see the Prism Index there. You don't see big peaks, you don't see big valleys. It's a very narrow band of returns. And when you overlay the S&P 500, you see huge peaks, huge valleys. Yet Prism has been very, very consistent. So what does that mean within the product? Well, let's take a look at a couple time periods here. There's the dot-com crisis bubble that happened. There's the financial crisis, and of course, there's the big run-up at the beginning of the bull market. Yes, it underperformed the peaks of the bull market, but look at what it did in the down times. It also didn't lose, so you weren't at zero necessarily then either. So very effective in mitigating the effects in the marketplace. Very stable and consistent returns. Let's look at a couple of those time frames and look what happened in the broad market versus what Prism did in that same time period. You see very stable, consistent styled returns, no big drops. Look at that 38.5% drop in the S&P, but Prism actually gained just shy of 11. Huge difference, a 40% difference in the returns. And you're absolutely right, in the bull run, it didn't reach the peaks of the bull run, but it had very, very nice returns, even last year in a otherwise pretty temperamental kind of market. So very stable, very consistent. That's the design of it. How do you buy it within the product? You buy it two ways. First, you have a 1-year point-to-point, 120% allocation or par rate, what you know to be par rate. We call it allocation in this particular product. With a 105, think of the participation rate as a bonus, a 105 bonus. No spreads, no fees, no caps. The second way to buy it is a 3-year point-to-point. You get 185 allocation. You get 115 as your bonus. Again, no sprees, no spreads, no fees, no caps. So gross is net. Rate of return times your par rate times your participation rate, and that's what you get. That's what you get. So very, very effective. And so what does that mean when you apply the participation rate to average returns? 10-year, 20-year, 30-year. Remember, we're illustrating this product at 5.47. 5.47 is our illustrated rate. There's our actual averages when you apply par and you apply the allocation. So we believe that we are actually under illustrating so that you will overperform, and you're never going to have to apologize to your clients for underperformance. That's our goal. We never want to have you apologize. Within the illustration itself, this is actually a screenshot from the illustration. You will have a chart that shows you 30-year histories of returns. That hypothetical interest credited is the par rate times the rate of return in that given time period. That's an actual rate of return had they been in the product at that time. Of course, your client wasn't in the product at that time. Therefore, from legal terminology, we have to call it a hypothetical interest rate. But you get the gross prism return, apply pars and participation rates, gives you the average. We're averaging a full 2+ points above the actual average of the index when you apply those factors. Very, very important. So you'll have one of these charts for every allocation option within the product, within your illustration. That will be available to you. The 3-year strategy, when you apply par and you apply index allocation, there's your average rates of return. Pretty substantial. You think about an IUL that you're illustrating at 5.47, and yet you're averaging above 10 on all time frames. It's a pretty healthy rate of return. And again, you're not setting your client up for getting those rates of return. You're illustrating in the 547 range, and you knowing full well that you should in actuality be outperforming. Again, there's the 3-year strategies. Average over the 30 years, 10.63. That'll print out with every illustration that you run so that you can show them full time period rates of return. And then finally, you have the full S&P. That was Prism. You have a third option, which is the full S&P, and that is just the full S&P. It's a 2-year point-to-point. We're going to look at that here in just a second. This is a piece that you're going to have available to you as a piece you can utilize with your clients. And this will show an 8.5% cap against the S&P against our 2-year strategy. So there's an 8.5 cap laid over the gross S&P on a year-to-year basis back to 1950. And that becomes a very interesting option. Now, when you look at this, this is also one of the pieces that you're going to have. You see that the overwhelming majority of the time, the S&P will outperform an 8.5% return. The gray is 8.5%. The green is the amount of return in that given year in excess of 8.5%. So that when you look at it on a widespread basis, the S&P averages 12.14% more return than 8.5% when it exceeds the cap, or that 8.5%. That's a pretty effective visual to show your clients that if they're in a capped product, look at all the return they're leaving on the table just because they're in the capped product. And we believe capturing that rate of return, or as much of it as possible, becomes mission critical to success in a product. So that's our 2-year strategy. The 2-year strategy is the full S&P. You get 90% allocation, a 105 par. This is the only option that has a spread to it, a 2.9% spread. But as we looked at earlier, very, very low in comparison to the rest of the market. So what do the rates of return look like when you look at these allocations and spreads? Well, here you go. Somewhere between 6.5% and just shy of 9% historically. That's what that'll give you. Now, when we released this product in its original form, our allocation was 85%. So even in these turbulent markets, we not only have been able to maintain our allocations, we've actually increased the allocation from 85 to 90. Now, in fairness, the spreads also increased a little bit from that time too. So the net is about the same when you factor the increase in spread and the allocation change. The point being here, very, very stable when you look at the broad market and you compare it to what's out there in the rest of the market. So we go back to that graph of the full S&P, an 8.5% cap, but now look at what happens when you overlay that 2-year strategy. You don't capture 100% of the returns, but you get pretty darn close. You get the overwhelming majority, but look at all that rate of return, the green that rises above the red, the cap. That's pretty substantial. This graphic, this is a marketing piece that you'll have available. It's available on my Nexus. So when you appoint for the sale of the Securian product with Amy and Jim, make sure that you get access to the Maya Nexus site, and you'll have all of the marketing materials, you'll have applications, you'll have everything you need. Illustration capability is all available on the Maya Nexus site if you don't have it already. There's the chart that prints out with your illustration, and that's available, and that shows you, again, the growth of the S&P and the overall growth of the strategy when you factor the par rates. Very, very effective when you start talking about overall rates of return. You've got to be able to capture those peaks when you're talking about the S&P. So 3 strategies, a 1-year prism, a 2-year full S&P, a 3-year prism, all available to you. The only one with a spread is the 2-year strategy. The 1 and the 3, no spreads, no fees, no caps, on all of them, no caps. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Amy, and I'm more than happy to stick around and answer questions if you want to ask those. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today. Make sure that you touch base with Amy and Jim as you go forward to get more of the information further in depth and be able to get appointed to sell the Securian product with us. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Al. Does anybody have any questions for Al? If you do, would you please type them in the little box there?
Yep, I will check in. And Al, just want to say, really appreciate the presentation. Yeah. I think it really goes, you did in an understandable way, a really complicated product and put it in words where both the advisors and hopefully in turn, the consumer can understand.
Thank you.
I do not see any questions, and we're already past our half hour. Al, I'm impressed that you got it done within 30 minutes, so kudos to you. If you guys do have any questions moving forward, I know Al went through a lot. Absolutely feel free to reach out to Amy. She can go through the concepts that Al has gone through today. And, if we need to bring Al back or a one-on-one conference call with Al, by all means. So with that said.
Thank you again, Al, for your time and expertise with this product. Every time you go through it, I pick up something different. And I've seen this presentation a lot, but I still keep learning, so it's great.